Hi, everybody. Welcome to Cloud Experts Unleashed. Today, we're going to talk about security practices for ColdFusion and beyond. We're hoping to make this a quick topic to go over some high-level items that you can start applying to your application and server environments today. And we hope that you walk away with some tips on strengthening your server security and your overall application security as well. I'm the CTO of xByte Cloud, and look forward to going over this. Right, so as we jump into this, I'll go over each slide and provide some information that you find helpful, hopefully find helpful. First, I kind of want to dive into what are some common security challenges. This could be true for all web applications out there. Today, we'll be talking a little bit more about Cold Fusion. But most applications today, they often lack security by design. A lot of apps were built 20 plus years ago. They've been maintained over time. There's been libraries that have been able to become outdated and may present, some kind of vulnerability. So older applications, they can inherit vulnerabilities that you may not be aware of. Outdated software versions is another common exploit vector that we see. So if you're on Cold Fusion 10 still, or 11, or 2016, each of these versions are getting older and older, and more exploits and vulnerabilities are becoming available online. As the security landscape grows and security becomes more challenging, even proof of concepts, manners to exploit Cold Fusion, and not just Cold Fusion, but any application stack is becoming widely available online. If your application server is not locked down through best practices, you're also opening yourself up to potential vulnerabilities. Next, we'll kind of talk about the critical steps for security. These are just high level steps you can begin taking today for your Cold Fusion environment. First and foremost, you should familiarize yourself with your application or your software stack and understand the architecture, what dependencies are in place. Are you using MS SQL, MySQL, some other database type? What version of Cold Fusion are you on, and what hotfix are you on? Understanding that landscape, knowing what components are critical to your application and could play a role in security is very important. The next thing that can be taken is updating your Cold Fusion environment to the latest versions of Java, to the latest hotfix, ensuring your database software is fully up to date, along with any other third-party services you leverage, like Mail, within your Cold Fusion application. Not only that, but you should also perform regular vulnerability assessments to identify and assess your application's risk. What software versions can be detected from the outside looking in? What software versions can be detected from the inside looking in? And are those vulnerable? And is it opening your application to further vulnerabilities and potential exploitation? You'll see here there's a comment, 60% of breaches involve vulnerabilities that were patched but not applied. So these are vulnerabilities that have been identified. They're being exploited in the wild. There was a fix added for them, and those applications never got that patch, and they were still impacted. So it's very critical you keep your services up to date. Another common vector we see in the Cold Fusion landscape, particularly, and this is true for all web applications as well, is SQL injection. It's still a very prevalent attack vector, and a lot of older applications and sometimes even newer can be subject to SQL injection attempts and even successful attacks. One tool that's native to Cold Fusion, I say a tool, it's actually a tag, is CF query param. SQL injection from a Cold Fusion standpoint can typically occur when you ask a user for input and then include that input into a SQL query. So we're talking first name, last name, it could be an address. If you're not sanitizing that input that's going to be ran against a query, it could actually result in SQL manipulation, or the manipulation of your intended SQL query, which can result in a dropped database, malformed data, even information disclosure. So you can utilize CF query param to set a SQL type attribute. Um, And that SQL type attribute would be like the data type of your column. So you might have it be you may only be expecting integers, for example, or numbers. Well, if someone tries to pass in a query that's using, a name or SQL structured data, that would fail. So essentially, you can define strict input validation, character limits based on what you're expecting that form input to be. Not only that, but as bots, crawl applications or bad actors try to exploit applications, sometimes they're met with forms or even login pages that have no WAF or no CAPTCHA component to verify that the user interacting with the application is actually a real user. So you can implement CAPTCHAs that actually validate the user interacting with your site is a real person. That's a way to stop some automation or automated bot activity. Another option is, of course, a web application firewall. There's things like Cloudflare. We have Foundio, FuseGuard, or FuseGuard by Foundio, which can help mitigate and identify some of these risks before they affect your application. Another common vector we see in ColdFusion's landscape is file upload security in general. You should restrict any file types that are being uploaded to your application. You should restrict that. If you use CF file, you have the ability to restrict file extensions, individual file extensions. So, if you're a ColdFusion application, you may not want a PHP file that can be uploaded to your site. So if you're using CF file, keep that in mind. And if you're using other tools out there, you can also restrict the upload of those files. The reason this is particularly dangerous is if you're uploading files to a web server and that web server that's being uploaded to, let's say those files are getting uploaded to a subfolder under your application's www roots. What a hacker can use as an attack vector is as that file gets uploaded, let's say they're able to do PHP or even upload a CFM file, they can browse to that file as if it exists on the server. If they have the ability to navigate to your upload directory. A common tactic for mitigating that is you can place your, any files that you're uploading or any temporary directories, place that outside of the web root so it's not accessible online. But just keep in mind any kind of file inputs or upload capabilities your application has. Um, you'll want to ensure that these aren't extensions you aren't expecting. You could also fall victim to obfuscation. So if the file type is hidden, or maybe there's no extension, and there's other ways to execute it through your web server's context, those can certainly pose risks as well. Let's see. Next, we'll talk about preventing code injection. So this kind of falls in line a little bit with SQL injection as well. As you introduce components to your application, particularly database components, you should make sure you're only using read-only users for any of your select operations. You should apply limited rights for any users that can write to the database. So if they're writing to a log table, there's no reason they should be able to write to the users table or the passwords, anywhere that you're storing sensitive data. At all costs, you should avoid using a system admin as a data source for your application. You may have multiple data sources or multiple databases tied to a single application. What you don't want to happen is if components or a portion of your application becomes compromised, you don't want every database to be impacted. Really try to limit the exposure there to users that should only have access to what you've designed them to. You can also disable unused features within your ColdFusion package manager. This is a new feature within ColdFusion where you can actually select individual or remove individual packages you're no longer using. So if you're not using mail, if you're not using PDF, all of these packages that are available out of the gate, they can be disabled, and you can enable them one by one based on your needs. Outside of just ColdFusion, you should also disable the unused frameworks and libraries to reduce your attack vectors. I still commonly see applications that implemented FCK editor, an older version of FCK editor, multiple years ago, and their application hasn't relied on that in years. And that is a commonly exploited library. They try to abuse the file upload capabilities built into that and the file manager capabilities. And a lot of users, I don't even know they still have it, but it resides within their application stack, and could eventually lead to an exploit. So make sure you're updating your library dependencies to the latest available and actively maintained releases. If you're still using FCK editor, make sure you're on the latest version. Make sure, in addition to that, you also have debugging outputs disabled. So anywhere within your application, if an error is returned, you have to consider, what does that error mean to a bad actor. If it's, if you're outputting the SQL query and, details about the server's file path and structure, that could also lead to a form of information disclosure. Another common, what I'll call an attack vector, is sessions, actually. So within ColdFusion, you have the ability to set unique sessions for each visitor, where this can cause issues even from a service unavailability standpoint, as bots or web crawlers. Unlike a traditional visitor, the bots don't have access to cookies. So each request that they make to your site, page over page over page, could actually create an individual session within ColdFusion. If you're not taking the right approach for identifying crawlers or bots, or users that aren't storing cookie details, you could actually overload the system's resources due to a wide number of or due to too many sessions available within the server. And that could eventually lead to like Java heap space exhaustion, or basically simulate a DDoS attack on your application because of resource limitations. A simple solution for this would be to ensure you're only giving bots and crawlers very short session timeouts. So if you can identify they don't have cookies, and they're not a real user, you could assign their session timeout to 1 second instead of 20 minutes, and that would really help reduce that bloat. Another thing is avoiding long-lived sessions to prevent session hijacking. There's, really not a whole lot of reasons to have a session alive for days and days on end. Really try to, assess your application and user requirements and set that session to a lower threshold. And then just monitor your session storage in general. Is there a lot of sessions that are unaccounted for? Do you have a lot of session activity when you're only expecting 10 or 15 users to be active on the site at any given time? That may be a sign of a bot creating unnecessary sessions, and there could be other activity going on you're unaware of. Another critical component of ColdFusion security is protecting your admin interfaces. So ColdFusion by default has a built-in internal web server. It runs on a port. And if that port is available on your server's public IP address, a bad actor could browse to that port and access the ColdFusion administrator on the World Wide Web. Where that would cause an issue is at that point they could attempt to brute force, and could get unauthorized access, modify your DSNs, modify server settings, etc. You should restrict ColdFusion access or ColdFusion administrator access to local requests only, or even better, an infrastructure VPN where you're connected directly to the server over a private IP address that's not available to the public. For application administrator interfaces, where you may have a web admin component outside of the ColdFusion administrator for administering your actual application, you should implement CAPTCHAs, brute force. You could take it a step further and whitelist it based on IP addresses or a VPN network. Any interface where you can input a username and password, you should really have some kind of measures of protection. So that could be a web application firewall. It could be tools like FuseGuard, like I mentioned earlier, and it could also be just restricting it based on IP addresses only. Some proactive security measures that you can take today for your application is as you're deploying ColdFusion server environments, you should look at their Adobe's, or you should look at Adobe's ColdFusion lockdown guide. That is a automated tool that will interact with your server to apply best practices, best server hardening practices for your ColdFusion installation. It limits access to sensitive files. It blocks unauthorized access, like we talked about earlier, to the CF administrator. And it ensures that your Cold Fusion service runs as a user with the minimum amount of permissions necessary to process Cold Fusion. Um, you should also perform routine audits of the server and application configurations. Make sure there's no holes that have been unintentionally opened. Is a port available? Is your CF administrator available to the public? Is there web admin? Are there users that are no longer, a test user or user that's no longer with a part of your application ecosystem? Is that user still active? You can use these measures in combination with a WAF, regular CF updates, and operating system updates, and then even an antivirus or EDR product that actively monitors what's happening on the server, inbound and outbound, to detect malicious activity. I've mentioned it a couple times, but as we talk about DDoS mitigation and just protecting your server's overall performance, Cloudflare is a very commonly used service, and what I consider to be one of the best services out there for helping mitigate common DDoS tactics, and just exploit attempts that are meant to bring harm to your site or impact or the availability. So leverage Cloudflare wherever you can to help mitigate DDoS attacks. Utilize their built-in web application firewall to protect against latest and emerging threats. 0 days, common exploit tactics. Cloudflare will block that at their edge before they ever make it to your server. In addition to that, Cloudflare can also be used to mask your server's IP address. You can monitor or you can mask your server's IP address so that bad actors don't actually know the true IP of your server. Every request has to go through Cloudflare first, and a lot of that junk or garbage traffic will be blocked. You should also monitor your server for session flooding to prevent unexpected downtime due to session overload. You can utilize tools like um, Fusion Reactor to look at the session states and see how many active sessions you have and the footprint of your actual Cold Fusion application. You could deploy Cold Fusion specific tools such as FuseGuard to inspect all inbound requests and block those malicious activity or malicious attempts at the application layer. We do have clients, and I've seen several implementations of Cloudflare and FuseGuard running side by side. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. Anything doesn't, that does make it through Cloudflare would still be inspected by the FuseGuard portion. Case studies and kind of lessons learned. A lot of these examples and just high level overviews are based on what we've seen over the years. SQL injection, like I mentioned, is still a common vector. We've seen SQL injection result in unexpected data loss due to form input that wasn't properly sanitized, and it resulted in lost data, and could have even resulted in information disclosure. File upload breach is another common tactic we see where a hacker will, upload a file through some vulnerable form or vulnerable aspect of the application, and then that bad actor can browse to the actual file and gain, essentially it's a web shell. They gain access to the application through that file. Another common tactic that can be used is, you should really have your source code available in Git, and perform regular audits on your files. What files are present on the application server? Do they align with your Git repository? And are you tracking unexpected file changes? If a file randomly changes or a file's randomly uploaded, you can use tools like Directory Monitor to identify if there's an unexpected upload. Conclusion, as you consider deploying ColdFusion applications, prioritize security from the start of development. You can leverage tools that are available out there like Foundio, Cloudflare, Adobe's ColdFusion lockdown tool. You should make regular updates a part of your normal cadence. Every time an update becomes available, one of your first priorities should be to apply the latest update. And that goes beyond just Cold Fusion. Consider every aspect, your operating system, MySQL, MS SQL, any other service provider you use. Um, and really, for next steps and what you can start doing today, just start deploying these measures and begin scheduling audits within your organization. So, thank you everyone for your time today, and I hope these quick tips helped. Thanks.